Welcome to the first Executive Leadership Council Business Brief. I'm Mike Hyder, President and CEO of the Executive Leadership Council. And at the ELC, we are dedicated to nurturing and amplifying Black excellence in leadership in business. Our mission is to open channels of opportunity for Black executives so that they can make positive impacts on the business and the communities that they serve. I became CEO of the ELC in March of 2021, and one of my priorities is gender equity. It is imperative that Black women be afforded the opportunities to ascend the corporate ranks and assume leadership positions too often held by men. And that's why I'm so excited about the ELC's newest partnership focused on Black women and women of color. Today, I am pleased to be joined by co-authors Benita Stewart and Jackie Adams, who are releasing their 2020 Women of Color in Business Cross-Generational Survey in partnership with the ELC. Before we begin digging into the data, let me tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. Both women are firsts, are Harvard Business School alum. Benita, who is an ELC member, was the first African-American woman promoted to vice president at Google. Jackie is an Emmy Award-winning former CBS News correspondent, and she was the first African-American woman who CBS assigned to cover the White House full-time. Now, after 2 decades at CBS, Jackie became a communications strategist. Jackie and Benita came together to write A Blessing, Women of Color Teaming Up to Lead, Empower, and Thrive. What differentiates the book is that they conducted proprietary research in 2019 to illuminate their business thesis, and then they went back into the field a second time during the last month of 2020. That new research brings us here today. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to the entire ELC team for this exciting launch. Jackie and I are delighted to be partnering with you for the release of our newest proprietary research. As first in our respective fields, Jackie and I have often been considered unicorns, these rare and valuable beings. But just as a group of geese is called a flock, a group of unicorns is called a blessing, and so we are. That's the origin of the title of our book, A Blessing. As MBAs, we believe that metrics matter, and so we collaborated to create and field our surveys with a highly regarded research and branding firm, Quadrant Strategies. We believe this is also the first time women of color in business have been examined in this way.
I also want to thank you, Michael, and your ELC team for your support for our work. For our 2019 survey, we asked 91 questions of 4,005 American female desk workers of 4 races, Black, Latinx, Asian, and white, and 4 generations, Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z. Given the turbulence of 2020, we decided to go back into the field to probe more deeply some of our original findings and to ask new questions based on the reactions to our book. This time, we asked 112 questions of some 2,300 women, again across the same 4 races and 4 generations. And for the first time, we queried 150 white male managers.
Wow, that's great. You know, let's get started. Both of you are leading Black women in your fields, and you have been onlys in your career. What was your finding about onlys, and why is it so important?
Well, the only finding is our KPI, a key performance indicator, driving much of our work in 2019. We found 47% of Black women, and that's almost half, told us that they are frequently or always the only person of their race in professional situations. We had hoped by the end of 2020, there might be a sharp decline in this number, but sadly the figures barely moved. In 2020, we saw 46% of Black women said they are frequently or always the only person of their race in a professional setting. For Latinx women, there was a slight improvement at 36%. For Asian women, the number ticked up slightly to 40%. But by contrast, 72% of white female desk workers said they were not very often or never the only person of their race in a professional setting, and this was down just 1 point from 2019. And based on the disappointing progress in reducing the number of onlys, we developed our own moonshot goal.
Right.
We are urging business leaders to eradicate the onlys by hiring in multiples. It's really a simple concept, we think. And given how many ambitious and well-prepared women of color candidates that are out there hidden in plain sight, we think the percentage should be reduced to 25% by 2025 and ultimately to 0.
Now, there was a particularly uplifting finding about Black women that Benita and I call the rise of the side hustle. We found that 29% of Black women said they have a business they run or are developing in their free time, compared to just 15% of Latinx women, 11% of Asian women, and only 10% of white women. That's almost a 3-time spread for Black women versus the white women. Now, there are lots of reasons for this sidepreneurship trend, but we could be witnessing the next employee migration 2.0. Black women's sidepreneur activities could be game-changing for corporations that value innovation and for venture capital firms who are looking for new investment candidates.
Wow, fascinating, fascinating. You know, business leaders faced this radically altered management landscape last year. The health and economic disruptions were followed by racial and social justice protests after this horrible videotaped murder of George Floyd. How were these external stresses reflected in your 2020 questions and findings? Any impact there?
Yes, that's a great question, Michael. We probed the impacts of the 2020 disruptions in a variety of ways, and we found 2 major sources of new stress and that diversity and inclusion in the workplace has evolved. We found for the COVID-19 pandemic, it caused significant additional stress among women desk workers of all races. It was 70% for Black women, 72% for Latinx, 60% for Asian, and 67% for white women. The racial and social justice protests seem to impact Black women more profoundly than the other races, according to our survey. 54% of Black women reported greatly or somewhat increased stress, and it was 39% for Latinx, 34% for Asian, and then only 30% for white women.
Black women report the strongest involvement in diversity and inclusion activities. Compared to their coworkers, 25% of Black women strongly agreed that they have taken on more voluntary tasks related to their company's D&I work, and that's outside of their normal job responsibilities. That just 18% of Latinx women, 15% of Asian, and again, 18% of white women shared this view, and the trend is observed for all of the generations. 21% of the Black women strongly agreed that because of their identities, there is an expectation that they take on responsibilities for D&I initiatives, and that's twice the percentages for the Asian and the white women. But among millennials, 56% of Black women feel they do receive positive rewards and recognition, but that's less than the other racial groups, 70% for Latinx and 60% for both Asian and white. And among the managers, white male managers reported the strongest rewards for their involvement with workplace D&I at 88%, while female managers of all the colors range between 60 and 73%, with Latinx at 73% and Black female workers at 64%.
Jackie, did you say 88%?
Yes, I did. For white male managers.
Wow. Wow. This is fascinating. Your research covered women across all races, as you've referenced. But in 2020, you've decided to add a cohort of white male managers. And why did you query white male managers, and how were their responses different from those of the female managers, just building on the data that you just shared with us?
Right, we just gave you one example. In our lived experiences, Benita and I have both benefited from positive working relationships with white male allies and mentors. And in fact, we devoted an entire chapter of the book for and about them called Dreaming of Allies. We acknowledge, frankly, how critical white male managers are to sponsorship as well as advancement and professional development for women of color. Indeed, your ELC program, Power of Women at Work, emphasizes this point. As we've been giving talks about the book and the 2019 research, we've seen a number of our current white male allies ask for more suggestions about how we can help them help us. And the bottom line is that they all want to win. And by courageously teaming up with highly qualified, ambitious women of color, we all can win. Now, as I said, specifically, we queried 150 white male managers for this body of work and compared their experiences with those of female managers of color across our 4 races: Black, Latinx, Asian, and white. And the top findings touch on subjects like stretch assignments, to whom and from whom one mentors and provides feedback. And we also have some new ideas, some actionable ideas for this winning that everyone wants.
And here are some of the top findings. 62% of white male managers said they received a stretch assignment within the last 12 months. And that's compared to 44% Black, 36% Latinx, 37% Asian, and 35% white female managers. We believe honest feedback is helpful to thriving on the job, especially in stretch assignments. And so we probed that, and we found 75% of white male managers said they were receiving helpful feedback, while the women managers in all 4 races reported a range between 37 and 51%. Latinx women managers topped this category at 51%, followed by Black women at 48%. So obviously, there's still room for feedback parity here. It was also surprising to see when we asked about mentoring, we found all women managers were more magnanimous in their willingness to help anyone, regardless of race or gender, versus the men. Women ranged from 56% to 65% willingness versus the men at just 34%. And on the flip side, we saw a limited level of comfort within the male manager cohort. The majority of our white male managers reported they both help, 51%, and seek career advice, 61%, from other white men. The survey explanation that the male managers chose was, and we quote, "because I feel that I can better identify with them." So these findings are at the heart of our challenge to corporate leaders. Inclusive and empathetic senior leaders, as well as managers, should seek and reward talent among people who do not look like themselves.
Wow. Now I see why you included them, and I'm so glad that you did. Wow. In 2019, you coined the phrase generational diversity to highlight the nuances of diversity and inclusion and the growing complexity of leadership across generations. What were your findings in 2020? Just illuminate on that a little bit, if you will.
Sure. Our 2020 survey found that our Gen Z and millennial workers, especially those who are Black and Latinx, are supremely confident that they will control their careers. They are mission-driven, they're prone to innovation, and they are tech-forward. They have an expectation that leaders will have the capability to create a workplace of belonging for everyone. And the bottom line is that it's important that leaders have a better appreciation for diverse generational perspectives if they want to harness this mother lode of innovation and retain these workers who are typically difficult to source. Now, don't forget, the census predicts that these young people of color, currently ages 18 to 29, those are the Gen Z and the millennials, they're about to become the majority of Americans in the workforce by 2027.
So here are some of our key findings. In 2020, 42% of Black Gen Zers said they are the first to know when something new or cutting edge is released. The gap with the other races was almost 2 to 1. Millennials' view of their career contribution is astounding. 68% of Black millennial women said they've made strong job contributions versus 48% Latinx, 44% Asian, and 55% white. As part of our research, we created word clouds from the responses to an open-ended question about the best way a manager or workplace supervisor could support our desk workers. It was quite telling. The women of color millennials responded with constructive criticism, direct feedback, communicate, be available, and growth opportunities. The women have provided an actionable playbook for managers in these 5 specific areas.
Wow. Benita Stewart, Jackie Adams, thank you for your partnership with the Executive Leadership Council to launch this groundbreaking study, 2020 Women of Color in Business Cross-Generational Survey. For those of you listening, you can read the full report on the ELC website, elcinfo.com. That's elcinfo.com. Today's event is the first in a series of virtual chats and panel discussions that I'll be hosting on issues impacting Blacks in business. Stay tuned for details on our next Executive Leadership Council Business Brief in May. Thanks.
Thank you.